And everybody. I'm sure we'll still have a handful more that will join us in the next couple of minutes, but wanted to thank each and every one of you for joining this session, which is titled Recruiting Virtually Through Handshake. My name's Kyle O'Neill, and I'm the Associate Director of Employer Relations and Development for the LSU Olin Career Center. Please make sure that you keep your microphones on mute and your video hidden for the duration of today's workshop. That's just out of respect for our speakers and also just to kind of keep some of the distractions in the background down. Should you have any questions during the session, please utilize the chat feature to send a message, and make sure that you send it to everyone so that the group will benefit from your questions as well. And we will do our best to answer those questions during the session. If your question does not get answered, please be sure to let us know by contacting us at the end of the event. For the best session experience, please select Speaker View in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And please note that this session is being recorded. I'm sure you probably heard that just a second ago. So without further ado, it is my honor to introduce our speaker, Aaron O'Keefe, who serves as a relationship manager with Handshake. So Aaron, take it away.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for the introduction and for organizing all of this and handling the logistics and things. So thanks for kicking us off here. And yes, my name's Erin O'Keefe. I work at Handshake, and for this presentation, I'll be talking through a lot of tips in using Handshake to recruit virtually. So I'll just go ahead and dive in and get started here. Just to talk a little bit about the agenda and what we'll be talking through today, I'll go into my background in a moment here, so you know where I'm coming from. But for the agenda, we'll go through the background of Handshake, kind of how it's set up as a system. I'll talk a bit about Handshake basics, and then I'll talk through some student trends based on survey responses we've collected this summer and spring in terms of students being comfortable recruiting and working virtually. So we have some cool data to share there. And then for the bulk of the presentation, I'll be talking a lot about digital recruiting strategy in Handshake, just things to keep in mind, as well as how to set up a virtual event. And then last but not least, I'll talk through a couple of additional resources. And as Kyle mentioned, as we go along here, please don't hesitate to chime in on the chat, asking a question to everyone. I have it open here, and I'll keep an eye out for any questions that come up. But a little bit about myself. So I've been working at Handshake for about 3 years now as a relationship manager. I work directly with school teams. So LSU is one of my partners. I work with them as they use Handshake, just answering any questions and making sure they're using Handshake as best they can and helping with their career services strategy on Handshake. So that's my role. I'm based in San Francisco, and this actually ended up kind of being the perfect role for me. So prior to Handshake, I was based in the Midwest in Chicago, and I worked at Deloitte Consulting as a campus recruiter. So I think most people here are, or I think there's a lot of recruiters, like campus recruiters here, I assume. I have so much empathy for your role. I did a lot of event planning, schlepped around a lot of materials and signs and giveaways to career fairs, and put in a lot of long hours there. So I was in that role for 3 years in Chicago, and used Handshake a bit, but that was kind of when Handshake was newer, but really enjoyed the platform, obviously. And before being a campus recruiter, I actually started my career in higher ed. So I got my master's degree at Northwestern University, where I was a career counselor intern. And then after that, I worked at Chicago Booth on their career services team. My main role was vetting jobs and employers who posted jobs at Chicago Booth. And then I also did a ton of event planning there. So again, have so much empathy for folks who do event planning, which I think is obviously a major component for both career services and recruiting. And we'll talk a bit about event planning and how it's quite different now, setting up virtual events, but there's still so many logistics and considerations in mind. So we'll definitely get into that as well. Next, I'll just share a bit of background information about Handshake for those of you who aren't as familiar with how it works and how it got started. So just some context here. This is my favorite slide to describe kind of the main differentiator for Handshake in terms of the network model. So before Handshake was around as a career services job posting system, we had our legacy model here where a recruiter at any company, I was at Deloitte, would have to create a username, create a password, and post a job separately for every single institution at which they wanted to recruit. This is something I was very familiar with as a recruiter. I had all these different passwords for all these different systems, and each time I posted a job, it was slightly different. The form was different, and it was just more prone to error, and honestly, just didn't really incentivize me to post my job to more institutions because that process was very cumbersome. So with the start of Handshake, they really wanted to flip this model around and just make it much more efficient for employers to post jobs to as many schools as they would like to. Our mission is to democratize opportunity, and this model helps support that, just making this process very streamlined for recruiters so that they don't have to focus on just very few schools, but can open up their opportunities to students across schools across the country. So with that, and if you've posted a job in Handshake, you would be familiar with this, but when you go to post a job in Handshake, you have one Handshake account for any schools who you post to, and the process is flipped. So instead of starting with the school first, you post the job information on a standard job form that doesn't change, and then once you filled out that job information, you click, 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 click all of the schools that you want to send your job to. So it just makes it much more efficient, and obviously has really caught on. We're still a startup, and we're in 6 years. I think we're 6 years old as a startup now, and we're already the core platform for over 1,000 colleges and universities. And then in terms of employers, we have 100% of the Fortune 500 employers using our platform and over 300,000 employers total. So really, really took off here. Each year working here, it's been really exciting to see kind of the next version of what we're working on and how we're improving this experience for students, career services, and employers every day. So very, very exciting company to be at. Okay, so that's my spiel on the background of Handshake. Next, I just wanted to go into some basics, some recruiting basics in Handshake. Some of this information might be familiar to those of you who use Handshake regularly, but just kind of wanted to cover the basics here. So with Handshake, you're likely at least already connected, hopefully, to LSU in Handshake, since LSU uses Handshake as their job posting platform. Just noting here that you can always connect with more schools in Handshake if you'd like to, or you can continue to focus on LSU. But in your schools tab in Handshake, you can always click this More Schools on Handshake button. We have filters on the side here, so you can filter down to different types of schools. And whenever you'd like to, you can reach out by clicking this Request button to connect with more schools. In order to post at schools, employers need to request to connect to a school, and career services teams play a really critical role here. For an employer to post a job, career services teams first vet that employer and the job to approve it. So that this is an important step to make sure you're requesting to connect with schools first. So that's how you connect with more schools. In terms of posting jobs, one thing I like to talk a little bit about is the preferences that you can use when you post a job in Handshake. So for those of you who are familiar with Handshake, you can set a number of different preferences such as school year, graduation date, a GPA minimum, if that's something you need to do for your job. And then also major groups in Handshake are super important, and actually very important to our team as well. So we work really carefully to try to elevate the most relevant jobs to students based on their major and jobs that are popular in their major, and also based on their preferences. Uh, this is difficult to do if employers skip over the major groups section. So I highly recommend, if it makes sense for your role, indicating which major groups you're targeting for this role. It really helps align kind of the students you're targeting with your role. And one thing that's really important about Handshake that was probably different from other systems that you've worked on, I know it was different for me when I was a recruiter. When I posted jobs in other systems, if I put the GPA minimum was like 3.0, let's say, only students with a 3.0 could apply. So I was like hard blocking any students who had below a 3.0 GPA. Handshake does not work that way. So any student can apply to any role, regardless of whether or not they meet the qualifications or preferences. So we don't ever hard block students from applying to a role. You can filter out students who don't meet the qualifications, and I'll show what that looks like in a moment here. But that's just something I wanted to call out, is even when you indicate preferences for your role, any student can apply to that role. So therefore, don't be shy to fill out major group preferences if you're targeting students within a certain area of study. And then at the end of the job posting process, this is kind of what I was mentioning earlier, you can select however many schools you'd like to send that job to. You can do a global start date or a global expiration date and a global expiration date, or you can do different expiration dates school by school. So that's always an option there. Something that is semi-new, although at this point it's been around for a while, there is the option to indicate in your job posting that you want students to apply through an external system. So you can either have students only apply in Handshake, or have them get redirected to an external system if you're using like a different ATS to handle your recruiting process. If you select this option to apply through an external system, that it's very seamless for students. So when students click the apply button, they're taken straight to your separate ATS site. So just an option here that I wanted to call out. Okay, this is what I was referring to earlier when I mentioned any student can apply to your jobs, but you can always filter down your applicants based on whether or not they match the preferences that you put in your job posting. So you can view all of the applicants who applied and just start viewing as many applicants as you want. But if you really want to home in on students who meet your preferences, you can use these filters to say, I want to exclude the student applicants who don't match my major preference or any of these preferences here. So just wanted to note that functionality. Couple of other capabilities in Handshake. You can search for students in Handshake. You can search for the students at the schools where you're approved. These are the filters that you can use to filter down to students who you might want to view their profiles and potentially message them. So this is in your Handshake account under the Search Students menu item. So it's something you can take advantage of there. And this is a screenshot of what it looks like if you want to message students individually. There's a little bubble icon to send a message to students. Students you'll only be able to see profiles and message students if, one, they've signed into Handshake, so they have to have signed into Handshake to activate their account. And two, we do leave it up to students completely in terms of how visible they want to be in Handshake. So students can make their profiles private, they can make their profiles public to employers. And actually the third option is they can make their profile public to employers and other students across the network. So you're only able to view profiles of students who have intentionally opted into making their profiles public. And just another tip here, if you're using Handshake with a lot of other recruiters at your company, you can filter down to like your favorite schools and your job postings. So on the school's management page, you can select school favorites that you regularly post jobs at. And then, especially if you're at a bigger employer, chances are that there's more schools that your employer is approved at. So you can see, okay, what are other schools where my employer is approved to post? And then this is where you would see even more schools to potentially connect with on Handshake. And then on the jobs page, so when you look at your company's jobs in Handshake, you can see all of the jobs that your company has posted, but I would recommend checking out this link here, this edit this link. You can set your view to show all Handshake jobs or just the jobs created by you personally, the recruiter. So a couple of different ways to set up what you're looking at in Handshake. Okay, so those were the basics of Handshake. Just kind of wanted to talk through some of the basic functionalities here. Next, I'll get into even more exciting information, which is some student trends we've noted from surveys we sent out this spring. I'll just pause for a moment here to see. It looks like there are no questions. Folks might already be pros at Handshake, so we have a good group here. Okay, I'll continue to keep an eye on the chat if questions come in, but I'll go into this student trends section next. So I'll go through these slides and definitely want to talk through what we discovered in these trends. And I'll call out different things here, but we sent out 2 surveys to students on our network, one survey in April and one in July with questions about recruiting virtually and kind of the comfort level with that, as well as interest in working remotely. So this first slide here looks at students participating in virtual events. When we first sent out the survey in April, back in April, at the start of this new era, 19% of students surveyed had planned to attend a virtual event. So some students showed interest, but it wasn't super high yet. Granted, this was kind of the start of just a very virtual recruiting era of time. Now we've seen by July that 46% of students that we surveyed have attended a virtual event. So more students attended an event than initially said they were interested in attending a virtual event. So it's interesting to see the growing interest here. Definitely recommend, not shying away from virtual events, and I'll talk through how to set that up in Handshake. Okay, more stats. So this here is just trying to reinforce the fact that students do see clear benefits in virtual events, but also are still navigating how best to virtually recruit. So a key stat here is 38% of students reported they're still trying to find the right ways to network in a virtual environment. So definitely room for growth here. 60% of students did note that recruiting virtually saves time and allows you to engage more quickly with recruiters. Only 33% said it's an enjoyable way to network. So there's still kind of potential for growth in terms of comfort level here, but we definitely see an increase in students engaging more in virtual recruitment. Okay, this stat is really encouraging. I like kind of the key call out here at the top. 90% of students think working online is easier or as what they expected. So about 40% said it's easier than expected, and then about 50% said it's about the same as expected. I know for myself and my colleagues, it did take some adjustment to do literally everything through Zoom, especially since we were accustomed to doing a lot of in-person meetings. From what we're seeing from students here, they're finding it pretty easy. Makes sense given kind of the comfort level with this generation and technology as well. This stat is really cool. It looks at the interest of going back into the office after having a virtual internship or job. So we surveyed students that had a virtual job or internship this summer, and half of them still would prefer to be in the office to have that in-person experience. But the other half was kind of a mix. So 28% said they would prefer to not be in the office. They must have really liked the flexibility of working virtually. And 22% would prefer to be in the office part-time, so kind of a mix of in the office and working virtually. So definitely interesting to see that students are split and also just open to working virtually and may even prefer it for future job opportunities. And this next slide goes along the same lines of when we polled students of their interest of accepting virtual jobs after graduation. So we asked, how open are you to taking a fully virtual job after graduation? 51% said they felt positive. They responded with positive responses. So either very open to taking a fully virtual job or open to taking a fully virtual job. And then an additional 24% were still even neutral, so probably open to it, or at this time didn't have a strong feeling one way or the other. And then there was still a significant portion of students where they answered negatively to this, either just somewhat open or not open. So still wanting that in-person experience. So really interesting to see here what students are open to in terms of just a fully virtually job or still leaning towards in-person experiences. And then we asked students the likelihood of their staying enrolled, even if fall semester is virtual. This was a question we asked students back in July. We had very positive responses to this. I know there was a lot of speculation, especially earlier on in COVID, in terms of whether students would just take this semester off. Of the students we surveyed, we had really positive responses to this. So 92% said either 92% said they were at least somewhat likely or very likely to return to campus this fall semester, and just 8% said unlikely. And those were the main key takeaways from the surveys that we sent out this spring and summer that I wanted to share from the student perspective. Our employer team also works a lot with employers and recruiters on Handshake, obviously, and we do periodically send out surveys to our employer contacts. So these 4 points here are the top 4 priorities we've heard from recruiting teams during this COVID era and this time of recruiting virtually. So we asked them, what are your top priorities? And these were the 4 that were most popular in terms of what recruiters were selecting. So first, resetting recruiting goals and expectations. Just generally understood that this year is going to look different from previous years. So the tactics and the approach and even the goals might look different for all of our recruiting teams. And the expectations in terms of the timeline and how we recruit with students is completely different. So just kind of resetting those goals and expectations. Second priority is building personal connections with candidates. This is a topic our employer team talks a lot about with our employer partners. So now that you can't have your brand literally on campus and in person, and you can't shake hands with students and meet them personally, how do you still stand out and build personal connections with candidates? in a virtual world. So a lot of discussion on this point. And then the third and fourth ones, still really wanting to effectively reach students without doing so in person. And then finally, definitely a lot on training and equipping the team, just making sure the team is comfortable fully recruiting virtually for this upcoming fall. So none of these priorities are surprising at all, but kind of interesting to see the ranking here. Okay. I am still keeping an eye out on the chat. So again, feel free to put in any questions as we go along here, but it looks like there are none yet. So I will continue forward. And Kyle, just to do a quick check, since I haven't heard anyone yet, can you let me know that you can still hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good. We got you.
Okay. Okay, cool. I like to do quick gut checks, especially
Yeah,
if there's no
no, that
questions coming
makes
through.
perfect
So
sense.
appreciate that. Okay, so next we'll shift to some tips in recruiting completely digitally for this upcoming fall. Thank you, Dana, for the encouragement. So I'll go through some strategy tips and then I'll go into some specifics on what this looks like in Handshake. So components of digital recruiting strategy, these are kind of the four key components that, as our team just talks about this with employers, that employers are really focusing on. So kind of the high level pieces here. First, your virtual brand. So making sure, again, your brand is still notable and known, even though the only way you can reach students and promote your brand is in many cases still virtually. School strategy, just thinking at how you're interacting with career services teams and schools. Obviously, career services teams like the LSU career services teams are amazing and extremely helpful in terms of marketing and hitting students at the right time with the right messaging. So definitely a key component that we're talking a lot about with employers. Proactive outreach. So students do search in Handshake and they do look for jobs, they look for events, but there's also a lot of employers proactively reaching out to students and messaging students in Handshake. So instead of waiting for students to come to you, leveraging like the messaging tool, for example, to reach out to students first. And then multi-channel strategy, so just different ways to connect with students virtually, not just through one channel like virtual events, for example. So building a virtual brand, one thing that I'll call out in terms of just the specifics of Handshake is if you have a Handshake account, you have a company profile. And if you're signed into Handshake right now, on the left-hand side of the screen, you should see a menu item that says company profile. I would definitely recommend checking that out, keeping that up to date, and it might be worth updating your company profile before this upcoming school year. Students have the ability to look at company profiles. If a company is hosting an event, posting a job, participating in a career fair, students can do their research in advance, and we actually really encourage students to do their research in advance and check out the company profiles. So you'll definitely want yours to look very snazzy and up to date, and ensuring that you're promoting kind of the values of your company, using that profile to tout your culture, the importance of mentorship, inclusiveness, etc. Values that might be really important to the students who you want to recruit. And also still creating excitement virtually. So adding personality to both your profile and maybe your outreach to students as well. Showing that personality and candidate excitement can really help recruiters and employers stand out to students. Connecting with schools digitally. So this is almost a given, but for the schools who you might normally attend in person for in-person events, make sure you are now still connecting with those schools, but in a virtual way. So one obvious way is by hosting virtual events and making sure to invite the schools you want to invite to those events. One consideration for this upcoming year that I know employers are thinking of is just thinking about your talent pools and considering other schools where you might not normally recruit while still maintaining the important relationships with schools where you already recruit. And I mentioned this earlier, but always important to continue nurturing those relationships with career services teams who are now also mostly working virtually right now. I know this varies school by school, but definitely keeping up the relationships with career services teams. Most of the schools I work with, the career services teams send out newsletters and do a lot of marketing with students. So definitely important to lean on career services and their expertise, especially during this time. And just to speak on that a bit further, I think especially when we first kind of hit this new COVID era, our team really relied on school teams to learn what is happening on campus, what messaging is happening on campus right now, when is the right time to reach out. It really, really varies school by school, and the career services teams have the institutional knowledge and they know best about when's the right time and how best to message things to students. Since I know that will vary for this upcoming year, where we have some schools that are completely virtual, some schools that are semi-virtual, and then some schools who are pretty much just going back in person with some social distancing tweaks. So I really recommend relying on your career services teams to first understand the landscape so that your messages hit in the right way. This tip on the bottom of the screen here, this is like a specific Handshake tip for your contact information. So like I mentioned earlier, students can view company profiles and check out the information on that company. On your company profile, there's a public staff list where that is visible to students. So if you want to make sure to make yourself available to students and have your email address accessible to them, make sure your contact info or a teammate's contact info is public on there, just to make sure that's available to students. And that is, you can do that in your user settings in Handshake. Sending proactive outreach. This is something I mentioned earlier, but you can message students in Handshake, and that can really, really help you stand out to students if you're really wanting to encourage them to apply to your jobs. So for proactive outreach, cannot emphasize this enough to just encourage everyone to be, of course, super thoughtful about the type of outreach that's going out. We have had situations where students have received kind of just clearly copy and pasted texts from totally legitimate employers, but since it looked kind of too templatized or like the font was kind of weird, our support team has received concerns from students wondering if this is like spam or fraudulent employers. So definitely encourage you to be really thoughtful about the outreach and personalize the message to students whenever possible to stand out. So referencing their name, their major, or their university to make sure it's a tailored message to students. Deploying a multi-channel strategy, which sounds very fancy, but it's essentially just using the virtual format for whatever you typically do virtually, including using a virtual format for virtual events and virtual interviews. And honestly, like just being honest with students, I think is something we've seen work really well. So that's kind of what this tip is calling out here, just acknowledging what the situation is at your company right now, and mention how your business is responding by recruiting virtually. Okay, so those are some high-level tips, and I'm going to go into event tips specifically. And Kyle, I think I have like 10 minutes left, correct?
Yes, you are
Okay.
right on schedule. Yeah, we've got about
Okay.
2 minutes
Okay. I
left.
just wanted to make sure. Okay. So those were high-level digital recruiting strategy topics that I just talked through here. I'm going to look at events specifically now and events in Handshake and what this looks like. So I'm going to call out, there's steps for each of this. So I'm going to start with step one, of course. Thoughtfully planning your virtual event might seem like a given, but we've seen events go well if it's planned thoughtfully from the get-go. So a few things to keep in mind here. First, really important to set your goal, not just to host an event just because you want your brand and name to get out there, but why are you hosting an event? Is it to spread brand awareness? Is it to answer questions from students? Is it to drive applicants? So good to align on the goal of your event with your team. Finding a host. So really important to note who might be speaking most of the time at the event and who might be really good at communicating in a virtual setting, and who might stand out to students for your virtual event. And then finally, of course, planning your content. So again, personalization really matters. If your event is just for LSU students, make sure to highlight why LSU is so great, which there are a number of reasons, of course, and really tailoring your promotion in that way. Choosing an event format, this was really cool for me to see this like outline of what our employer team put together. When I was a recruiter, my events were an info session and a networking event, like a mix and mingle networking event. And then we did coffee chats as well. That's how it was for me, at least like 3 years ago. It was pretty straightforward and kind of the same formula every time. We are seeing employers get more creative with this, which is definitely can be more compelling to students and can stand out in the list of events they can see. So you could host something like an Ask Me Anything event, if you're familiar with the lingo. That's AMA. I don't know if anyone's on Reddit, but it could just be an event that you set up time for students to ask questions that they have about your company or recruiting practices. Employee panels, so maybe getting together some young alumni from an institution and having them share about their experiences and answer questions. ERGs, when I recruited this, I definitely saw this as being something that candidates really cared about and continues to be something we hear about from students, that they really want to know, want to be aware of the culture of a company and the different resource groups that are supported. So maybe having an event that really focuses on or highlights the ERGs at your company. And then if your office is open, it totally might not be, but we've seen employers host a 360 office tour, which can really be engaging, especially if you're moving around, for students who are signing in virtually. If folks have other event format thoughts or ideas that you're trying out this upcoming semester, feel free to chime in the chat box. No pressure, but always curious to hear like other formats that employers are considering. Setting up your event in Handshake. So this is a screenshot of exactly what Handshake looks like when you request an event at an institution. It's pretty straightforward here, but just wanted to call out a couple of things. Chances are your event is going to be virtual, so just make sure to indicate that the format is virtual here. And and you can input your web host URL. It doesn't have to be Zoom, it can be any platform. And then I'll show you what that looks like on the student side. I really like Brooke's. Brooke is going to attempt, I'm sure it'll be successful, Brooke, a trivia night to invite students to participate and give away prizes to winners. That's cool. I would participate in that, even though I'm terrible at trivia. Okay, so setting up the event in Handshake, making sure you put the web host URL in the field here. I wanted to share this screenshot. So students can register for upcoming events, and then on the day of the event and leading up to close to the event time, they'll see this button that says join virtual event. They won't see that until it's time for the event to start. And when they click this button here, it will take them to whatever you put in the web host URL here. So we've made it really straightforward for students just to connect to whatever whatever video host you're using. Some tips for moderating an event. So of course, testing audio and video before going live, starting it early, always helpful. And then we're seeing more employers kind of making sure they're tag teaming events and supporting events. So maybe assigning one person to do the presentation itself and another team member to moderate the chat and any questions that come in from students. And then making sure that there's some follow-up after the event and kind of using that to build momentum with potential candidates. So considering to follow up with your registrants, maybe at the end of the presentation, trying a call to action, like encouraging students to apply for a job. And I'll show you too in terms of messaging students who have RSVP'd. So these are a couple of screenshots of, again, exactly what Handshake looks like from the employer side. If you host an event in Handshake, you can click a button to view your RSVP page. I want to call out a couple of actions that you can do with students who have RSVP'd. If you select attendees, you can click this button here to message students. So that's something you can do either before the event or as a follow-up to the event to reach out to students who have registered. And for students who have RSVP to your event, you are also able to download their resumes. So you can almost like download a resume book of RSVPs from your event. To do so, you would just need to select all of your registrants, and then there's this more drop-down button to click download resumes. You're only able to download resumes of students who have uploaded a public resume on their profile. And the only way for employers to access resumes is either a student has to apply for your job, or in this instance, RSVP for an event you're hosting. So this can be a great way if you're wanting to collect resumes from students to do so from RSVPs. And before or after the event, you can always click on a student's name to view their profiles. Students can fill out their profiles however they like. They are usually kind of pre-uploaded by career services teams who import their major GPA school year and grad year, but then students from here can fill out work experience and other information like their interests. Okay, a couple additional resources, and then I know we have one question here, but please don't hesitate to reach out to support under the help drop-down menu item. And our help center has a lot of great resources for any questions or troubleshooting you might have on Handshake. And then I would be very remiss if I didn't at least mention our Handshake Premium offering. So everything I talked through today is available for all employers, but our Premium offering offers additional perks like QR code event check-in capabilities, additional messaging campaign capabilities, branding, peer benchmarking, and a customer success manager. So please do note you can reach out to these two resources below. The email address is employers@joinhandshake.com if you want to learn more information. And I do want to very swiftly look at Michelle's question here. So she said, what if your virtual event asks for registration first? Our web host URL goes to the registration page. How would the join virtual event button work then? Michelle, it works the same. There's an additional field when you create a virtual event in Handshake. If you're also wanting students to register through a different platform, there's another field where you can input that as well. So there's like a host field, and then if you're also collecting registrations through another platform, there's a registration field. If you click request an event in Handshake, those fields should all be available to you there. And I kind of zoomed through that last part, Kyle and team, but hopefully that was helpful information. And it was very nice connecting with you all today.
Yeah. First off, thank you so very much, Aaron. This was so
Of
insightful.
course.
I love the information. We've got a little bit of time, and I do know Camille asked a quick question. She
Oh,
just
yes.
asked, can you download multiple resumes at once?
You can, Camille, like on the RSVP page, I this isn't a very realistic example because I only had one attendee attending my event, which is quite sad. But you could click this box like at the top of your list of attendees, and that would select all of them, and then you can bulk download the resumes of all of the registrants.
Excellent, excellent. Well, like I
Of
said,
course.
we still got about a 15-minute cushion, and obviously I do want to be wary of our next upcoming student panel session, but we can do kind of a quick last call if anybody has any final questions for Erin. Again, she did a fantastic job of covering this content, I think, throughout the presentation. And as Courtney informed everybody at the beginning, we are recording these sessions. And so we will be glad to share them, for further, digging a little deeper into them if you need to afterwards. But like I said, we've got maybe, 30 seconds to a minute. If anybody has any final questions, feel free to ask those in the chat. Um, and if not, then I will also preface this by saying again, thank you so much, Aaron, for your time and just for your
Of course.
relationship that you have with us. We appreciate all the work that you do for us here at LSU, and we appreciate you waking up early and down in cinnamon rolls and
Likewise.
joining us this morning. So
Yeah. No,
awesome.
no problem. It's fun connecting. Thank you, Jesse. Really fun connecting in this way and just kind of taking a step back and just looking at this landscape overall. And I love those student trends as well. I think those are super interesting, that info that our team collected, and also hopefully encouraging for folks to see the willingness of students to interact virtually, probably more willing than some of us are. So great to see that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is, like I said, super relevant information that I think everybody can certainly put to use as we go into a virtual fall. Yep. So,
Whew,
all right.
very
Well,
exciting.
yes, it is. It's exciting. So, with that, like I said, thank you again, everybody. You've got about 10 minutes before our student panel. So, go get that third refill of coffee, and we'll see everybody back for the student panel at 10:30. Thank you again, Aaron. We appreciate your time this morning.
Yep, thanks all. Thank you for hosting.
Take care.